After Sony hit big with Crash Bandicoot spawning 3 titles that are among the top 15 best-selling games on the PlayStation, heading into the next generation, the original plan was to turn this new Crash title into what the developers intended since its creation, a free-roaming world much like the Super Mario series when it transitioned into 3D. However, Naughty Dog wanted to move on with more creative control, so they became a first-party developer after being purchased by Sony in 2001, which meant they had to say goodbye to their Bandicoot friend because even though the series came out exclusively for the PlayStation, the IP belonged to Universal Interactive. But considering what Naughty Dog have achieved ever since, it was definitely the right choice. I wonder how many times I've mentioned this already. Plans for a Crash Bandicoot game set in a free-roaming environment were scrapped, and new developer Traveler's Tales quickly recycled another title before Christmas. Crash Bandicoot The Wrath of Cortex was released for the PlayStation 2 in October 2001, and for the Xbox and Nintendo GameCube by September 2002, the first in the series to cross-platform. After the events of Warped, not exactly how long because Cortex and Entropy were babies thanks to Crash, continuity does not apply here. Irate Uka Uka is having a meeting with the villains to scold at their past failures.
Imbeciles! Fools! Nincompoops! Can't you idiots do anything right? You 5 idiots need to come up with one good plan! Or else...
Whatever they planned, it causes natural disasters back on Earth. Aku Aku is wondering what his brother is up to. It turns out he unleashed a pair of masks called the Elementals, used as power-ups for Cortex's new super weapon, Crunch Bandicoot.
You cannot restrain them, Uka Uka. They are far too dangerous. This could spell disaster for us all.
Aku Aku barely escapes to warn our friends on what has unfolded.
We must find a way to stop them before they destroy the Earth and all of its inhabitants.
Coco has just finished building a virtual reality hub system to help travel across the world. The goal is to collect the purple crystals to imprison the elementals and crush Cortex for good.
It's time we evened up the odds in our favor.
It's a bit of a disappointment that all returning villains apart from Cortex and Uka Uka only make a few cameo appearances. Tiny Tiger, Dingo Dial and Entropy appear in a few Atmosphere levels, and that's it. I assume being relegated to a small role is punishment from Uka Uka for failing to stop Crash in previous titles. But if you're going to introduce new characters, could you at least make more than one?
This is the creature who keeps sabotaging your master plan? Ha! You gotta be kidding! I'll exterminate this field rat in no time!
Crunch Bandicoot isn't that bad, but all he is a hybrid of Crash and Tiny Tiger. I initially thought that was him on the front cover. And the idea of Crunch being a super weapon made by Cortex is taken straight out of the first game when Crash could have ended up in the same predicament. Actually, the latter is a pretty clever homage to the predecessors. As for the Elementals, they don't really count because of their lack of personality apart from their Bubsy levels of bad puns.
Is it getting hot in here? Is it safe to be wearing that fur? It looks flammable!
It has a surprising amount of recognizable talent with Kevin Michael Richardson, Mark Hamill, Ali Ermey and Clancy Brown. Imagine being in the same room as these two.
When are you and that super weapon of yours going to put an end to that interfering Bandicoot?
Don't talk back to me! I'll fix that attitude problem of yours!
Despite this, there's no sense of anticipation or creativity in the story. It starts with the villains bickering over how rubbish they are. It's a little bit funny, and it shouldn't matter too much because it's a platformer, but the story isn't as developed as the predecessors.
Bring it, brain-dead Bandicoot.
And this goes for the way the levels look. They're pretty well designed from a gameplay perspective, but like the story, we've seen all this before. It feels like the developers took a checklist made by Naughty Dog and followed all the steps. Medieval? Check. Snow? Check. Oriental? Check. Underwater? Check. Races, planes, jetpacks? Checkmate. Okay, done. Sell it for a full retail price. It's shameless. You'd think there'd be brand new level settings considering the thousands of years of history available, assuming that time travel plays a factor here. It's never explained. The whole point of sequels is asking yourself, what can I do to make it better? Take the PlayStation Trilogy for example. The sequels introduced analog movement, unlockable power-ups, and expanded the scope beyond the jungles. Tweaks then enhanced the experience each title over time. The Wrath of Cortex doesn't continue that progression. This would be fine if it was on the PS1, but you have a next generation console, you've got to do more than that. And no one was fooled. You could say the developers were scared of sabotaging what people loved, and by today's standards that might be a good thing. I mean, which game of the series post Naughty Dog would you play besides the Insane Trilogy? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. The music is alright, but it's too short, like NES short, especially on the bonus stages. You can tell when an OST ends and restarts. It goes silent for half a second. Why? I know it's nitpicky, but it gets irritating after half an hour of gameplay. Was this made on the cheap? It must have been if it takes as long as up to 20 seconds to load up a level. From a technical side, it's subpar at best. It doesn't utilize the full capabilities of the PlayStation 2, which I'm using to review this. There are only 25 levels with 5 secret ones, which sounds like a fair amount, but the older PS1 games could do that too. Plus, you return to the same setting more than once. You should be able to fit nearly twice as many individual levels with a DVD. It wouldn't be released for the GameCube, but if you look at the sales numbers, would it really matter? Did Traveler's Tales make this for the PlayStation and decide the last minute to enhance the graphics and release it for the next generation of consoles? If you played the predecessors, the similarities in the Wrath of Cortex will become blatantly obvious. All being said would be forgiven if it controlled well, and for the most part, it does. The levels are mostly 3D rail with a few 2.5D areas running behind swimming and flying. New gameplay elements include the Atmosphere, Mech Suit, the cover doesn't lie, and Coco fending for herself. In addition to swimming and flying, it takes up too much of the on-foot parts of the game, another reason why there needed to be more levels. Crash on foot controls exactly like Warped, which means there isn't much to go over. You can spin attack, slide, and belly flop. Coco has similar controls but is trained in martial arts. Nothing new, but it saves the Wrath of Cortex from being forgettable. However, you still can't control a camera. But unlike the predecessors, you'll really wish you could. The only thing worse is the loading times. First, enemies and traps can appear out of nowhere without a chance to react, highly obvious in the underwater stages. Second, whenever you're being chased behind by something big like a stampede or avalanche, a path often goes on an angle, forcing Crash or Coco to turn him or herself, so trying to correct it to hit the crates as part of obtaining the gem is frustrating. And third, the camera is always set up in a way that occasionally you'll never know how far forward you are from a platform no matter how many times you try to get past it. The latter, especially on the secret gem stages, cost me a lot of lives. At least the infamous bridge levels in the first game had the camera raised. You have a right analog stick available, Traveler's Tales. Use it! This is exactly what I meant by lack of progression by the developers, and why I recommend getting all the power-ups before collecting everything other than crystals, because they provide a bit more margin for error. These can be earned by beating one of the bosses, with the super belly flop being replaced with Tiptoe, which is only good for the bonus stages. A boss battle is unlocked when 5 crystals are collected in the elemental area, with Crunch Bandicoot appearing every time. Remember the masks in the story? They summon their powers into Crunch, making the obstacles different, but they're so easy the bad puns seem like the only serious threat. Like the predecessors, collecting all the crystals and beating the final boss isn't over. The real challenge is obtaining all the gems by smashing every crate on a level, and relics by completing a level before the time limit runs out. Just like, you get the idea. Though it's a teeny bit easier to get the gems and relics, a Sapphire one is enough to add to the full completion percentage, note that if you missed a few crates and you reach the end of a level, some are designed so there's no possible way to kill yourself to go back to the checkpoint, so you have to start the level all over again. But on the plus side, some runaway parts of the stage like tidal waves and avalanches will destroy the crates for you. Remember in Cortex Strikes Back when you had to take action in places you would never imagine trying through common sense? Well, every single colored gem is obtained through these skull and bone death routes. Some gems require a specific colored one to get to, aka backtracking, but point being it's more self-explanatory, which is why it isn't as hard to reach the 106% mark and get the real ending. Should have listened to Engine at the start, Ooga Ooga.
Need I remind you that Crash always finds a way to defeat us? Maybe he's just too good.
Enough excuses!
Couldn't take a hint, but then again there'd be no video game. I don't know what to make of Crash Bandicoot The Wrath of Cortex. This is one of the hardest games I've ever reviewed. Not the game itself, but trying to explain why it's unoriginal without saying so every sentence. At first I thought the critic scores were pretty harsh, but after playing it for the first time in ages, Yeah, it does feel extremely recycled. But do I dismiss it for its lack of innovation? Because every time I talked about something from the story, gameplay, graphics, it's taken from the PlayStation titles in some shape or form. It has the same level of originality the Call of Duty series today gets massive criticism for. Or do I praise it for the same reason? Because when the series eventually implemented free roaming gameplay, reception was even more negative. Though the Jak and Daxter series had already excelled in that category by then, so maybe it was a case of too little too late. But because the series made its mark on the PlayStation, the Wrath of Cortex was very successful commercially on the PS2, selling 5.4 million copies worldwide. More than any of the Jak and Daxter and Ratchet & Clank titles, which is criminal really because these are the better games. Still, the Wrath of Cortex is a passable entry despite minimal innovation. The controls and replay value are enough to be worth checking out if you can find it cheap. If it was released with a lower price tag brand new, it would have been justifiable. Crash Bandicoot would have changed appearances, formulas, and publishers over the years, but all it did was ruin interest, and its fall from grace was almost permanent. But after the recent successful comeback with the Sane Trilogy on the PlayStation 4, who knows what the series holds for the future?